The mall was bustling with its usual midday clamor. Bright fluorescent lights flickering over the polished floors, the chatter of shoppers weaving through the aisles, the distant thrum of pop music bleeding from storefronts. Amid this synthetic hum, John M. McTavish moved slowly but with deliberate purpose. His shoulders, stooped from years of bearing burdens both visible and unseen, carried the weight of time like an old worn pack. His fingers instinctively brushed over the familiar outline of the Purple Heart pinned to the lapel of his tweed jacket, tarnished, scratched, but indelibly sacred. It was more than metal. It was a fragile tether to a past riddled with sacrifice and loss, a silent testament to battles fought not for glory, but for survival and brotherhood. As he approached the Foot Locker Emporium, the sterile brightness of the store seemed almost jarring, a sharp contrast to the quiet dignity he carried with him. His eyes scanned the rows of shoes, seeking comfort for feet that had long outlasted the strength to carry him easily. When he finally found a sturdy pair, simple, unassuming, he headed toward the counter, clutching them like a lifeline. The clerk behind the register was a young man barely out of his teens, face flushed with the ennui of a job that demanded little passion and less respect. His eyes flicked toward John's jacket, landing squarely on the Purple Heart. "Sir, company policy prohibits unauthorized insignia," the clerk said flatly. His voice tinged with a sneer that betrayed contempt masked as authority. "That thing needs to come off now." John's breath caught. The words echoed in his mind like a punch. Dismissive, ignorant. His hand instinctively rose to shield the metal, a reflex born of years of guarding not just his body, but the stories etched into every scar. "This is not a thing, son," he growled, his voice low and brittle, yet edged with the steel of a man who had faced death and stood tall. "It was earned." The clerk, however, seemed oblivious to the gravity he was mocking. With a sharp, almost violent tug, he yanked the metal from John's jacket, tearing a small hole in the fabric, the metal clattering on the counter like a dropped relic cast aside. "Rules are rules, old man," he said with a cruel smirk, his eyes glittering with the arrogance of youth untempered by history. John's heart thundered in his chest, not from the pain of the rip, but from a surge of rage and helplessness that clawed at his dignity. Around them, other customers paused, some with shock, others with amused detachment, but none dared to intervene. The clerk's act was more than just physical. It was a violation, an assault on memory, on honor, on the very soul of a man who had given so much without asking for anything in return. The old veteran's hands clenched into fists, trembling, not with age, but with a fierce, aching fury. Yet restraint held him back, a lifetime of discipline and quiet endurance weaving a fragile barrier between impulse and consequence. Without a word, he bent to retrieve the discarded metal, the cold metal heavy with meaning, and turned away, the torn lapel of his jacket burning like an open wound beneath the glaring mall lights. Outside, as he settled onto a bench, breath ragged and mind swirling with the bitter taste of disrespect, the metal rested carefully in his palm, a fragile emblem of sacrifice in a world too quick to forget. The sharp sting of humiliation curled deep within John McTavish's chest, an ache far heavier than the physical pain from the torn fabric or the cold metal that now lay loosely in his palm. His fingers traced the outline of the Purple Heart, its worn edges familiar and yet now tainted by a fresh, invisible wound, the cruel disrespect inflicted not by an enemy on a distant battlefield, but by a stranger behind a retail counter, a reminder that the wars he fought had never truly ended. In the quiet sanctuary of his mind, memories flooded unbidden, the thunderous roar of gunfire, the faces of comrades lost to silence, the promises whispered under bloodied breaths, promises that this medal symbolized. And now, here it was, reduced to a mere object, discarded, disregarded. His breath trembled, not from weakness but from the surge of emotions he struggled to contain, anger simmering beneath the surface, a raw vulnerability exposed, and a bitter sorrow mingling with a deep, gnawing loneliness. The world around him blurred, the cacophony of the mall fading into a distant, meaningless murmur as the weight of invisibility pressed down upon his shoulders. How many times had he been invisible? In battle, in peace, in a society quick to overlook the ghosts that wandered among them, old soldiers whose scars lay hidden beneath skin and silence. A bitter laugh escaped him, hollow and jagged, as he glanced around the indifferent crowd. Eyes averted, whispers muted. No hands reached out to steady him or acknowledge the violence done, not just to the medal, but to a lifetime of sacrifice. The sting of isolation cut deeper than any wound inflicted by an enemy's bullet. John's mind spiraled through the years, wrestling with the ghosts of trauma and the fragile threads of pride that had kept him upright through the darkest nights. He felt the urge to shout, to demand justice, to make them see. Not just the medal but the man who bore it. But years of restraint, of learned silence, held him back. The image of his fallen brothers, their faces etched into his heart, reminded him that rage was a double-edged sword. Instead, he folded the medal carefully, as one might cradle a broken promise, and slipped it inside the inner pocket of his jacket. It was a silent act of defiance, an assertion that though stripped of outward honor, his spirit remained unbroken. His gaze lifted slowly, meeting the vacant eyes of the clerk once more, but this time with a quiet, resolute strength. No words passed between them, only the weight of history, sorrow, and the unyielding truth that some wounds, though invisible, could never truly heal. John rose to his feet, the ache in his chest mingling with a flicker of steely resolve. He would carry this day with him, not as a defeat, but as a stark reminder of the battles still fought in silence, long after the guns have fallen silent. The evening settled like a heavy shroud over John's small apartment, the dim light casting long shadows that seemed to echo the weight pressing upon his heart. The purple heart nestled deep within the lining of his jacket felt like a secret burden, a relic of a past he could neither escape nor fully embrace. But beyond the bruised pride and silent rage, there was a quieter ache gnawing at him, the distance that had grown between him and his son, a gulf forged by years of absence and unspoken words. John stared at the cracked screen of his phone, fingers hovering hesitantly over the contact labeled simply Michael. The name felt foreign, unfamiliar, like a threadbare cloak he once wore but had long since outgrown. So many years had passed, years filled with regret and whats, each one a silent chasm widening between a father and the boy he barely knew. The memories of a small boy's laughter, of bedtime stories half told, flickered weakly in the recesses of his mind, fragile and flickering like candlelight threatened by a draught. He wondered if Michael remembered him at all, if the years had erased his face, or if the son's heart still carried a trace of the man who once promised to be there. The thought twisted inside John like a knife, stirring a cocktail of hope and despair. How could he bridge the silence? How could he reach through the years of absence and pain without shattering the fragile shell of trust that might remain? His thumb trembled as it pressed the call button, and the ringing tone sounded like a lifeline thrown across an ocean of doubt. When Michael's voice finally came through, tentative, guarded, touched with a hesitance that mirrored his own, John felt the flood of emotion rise and crash like a storm within him. The son's voice was no longer the boy's laughter he remembered, but something tempered by the weight of solitude and struggle. Each syllable was a fragile bridge, trembling under the strain of memories and silent wounds. "Dad!" The voice cracked, fragile as glass. "Yes, it's me," John whispered, his throat tight, eyes stinging with unshed tears. "I've missed you, son. More than words can say." There was a long pause, a gulf of silence filled with everything left unsaid, before Michael spoke again, quieter now, as if testing the waters of a forgotten shore. "I missed you too. But it's been so long. I don't know if I can just." John's heart clenched. The son's doubt mirrored his own fears, the years of absence weighing down like an anchor. But beneath it all, a fragile hope flickered, the possibility of mending what had been broken, of reclaiming a fragment of a relationship frayed by time but not entirely lost. "I don't expect it to be easy," John said, voice raw with honesty. "But I want to try. We both deserve that much." As the conversation unfolded, tentative and trembling, John felt the first fragile threads of connection begin to weave between them. Fragile, imperfect, but real. The road ahead would be long, and the scars deep, but in that moment, beneath the weight of regret and longing, a father and son dared to reach across the silence. And in that reaching, perhaps, there was the first step toward healing. The knock at the door was hesitant, almost tentative, as if the weight of years stood between the past and the present, forbidding easy passage. John's heart caught in his throat, a tight, sudden pulse that echoed the storm of emotions swirling beneath his stoic exterior. The sound stirred something dormant, a fragile hope wrapped in fear, a question hanging in the silence. Who would come back after so long? When the door creaked open, the figure on the threshold was both foreign and achingly familiar. Michael, his son, no longer a boy but a man carved by time and trials, eyes searching for a place to rest, a home he had lost and now cautiously sought again. Michael's presence filled the cramped room like a whispered apology, a silent admission of absence and longing. The years stretched between them like a canyon of unspoken regrets and fragile dreams, but beneath the surface, John saw the same restless spark he once recognized, the stubborn pulse of blood tied by an invisible thread neither time nor distance had severed. His son's face bore the quiet marks of hardship, lines etched by struggle, eyes dulled yet flickering with a tentative hope that mirrored John's own. There was no rush, no flood of words, only the slow, deliberate crossing of space that had once been a chasm. As Michael stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him, John felt a surge of memories. The laughter of a child echoing faintly, the gentle rhythm of bedtime stories, the fragile warmth of a promise made long ago and forgotten beneath the rubble of years. The silence between them spoke volumes, of pain and longing, of the aching need for connection, and the fear that such connection might crumble at the slightest touch. Then came another presence, unexpected but deeply intertwined with John's past. Mark, his longtime comrade, the brother-in-arms who had stood shoulder to shoulder through hellfire and loss. Mark's entrance was like a ghost from a war long over. His face weathered but steady, eyes carrying the burden of shared scars and silent understandings. The years had shaped him differently, but the bond forged in battle remained unbroken, a tether to a time when survival was measured in moments and loyalty was the only currency. Mark's gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on Michael, then settling on John with a mixture of respect and unspoken concern. He stepped forward without hesitation, his voice low but steady, a grounding presence amid the swirling emotions. "I've been watching out for you, John. More than you know." John nodded, the weight of those words sinking deep. Mark wasn't just a friend. He was a living testament to a past that neither could escape, a reminder that even in the darkest chapters, bonds endured. Michael's eyes flickered with curiosity and perhaps a hint of wariness, the unspoken question hanging between them. What did this man mean to the father he barely knew? The room held its breath as the three men, father, son, and comrade, stood at the crossroads of past and present. Each carried wounds visible and invisible. Each bore the weight of choices made and chances lost. But in that fragile, tentative moment, there was also something else. The possibility of reconciliation, of rebuilding, of forging new paths from the fractured remnants of old scars. John felt it deep in his bones, the fierce, fragile hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the family he thought he had lost forever might begin to find its way back through the cracks. And with Mark there, a steadfast guardian of history and memory, the first steps toward healing felt a little less daunting, a little more real. The weight of silence lingered long after the door closed behind Michael, settling over the room like a thick fog that neither John nor his son dared to dissipate. It was not the absence of words that marked the moment but the heavy presence of all the words left unsaid. Years of misunderstandings, disappointments, and aching loneliness woven into the fragile fabric between them. John's heart pounded in his chest, a relentless drumbeat of guilt and longing that threatened to overwhelm the careful composure he struggled to maintain. The walls seemed to close in, pressing with memories of broken promises, shattered hopes, and the relentless ache of absence. Michael's eyes, guarded yet searching, held a storm of emotions, a mixture of resentment and yearning that John recognized as his own reflection. He saw in those eyes the boy who once clung to his father's hope, now tempered by betrayal and the harsh lessons of life. The past clawed at them both, a relentless specter that threatened to undo any fragile attempts at connection. And yet, beneath the veneer of distance and pain, there was an undeniable thread of shared history, an unspoken tether that neither time nor wounds could sever. John's voice broke the silence, trembling but resolute. He spoke not just to bridge the gap but to confess the raw truth that had haunted him. I never stopped thinking about you. Every day away felt like a fracture in my soul. I'm sorry. So deeply sorry for all the years I wasn't there. The words, simple yet profound, hung in the air, fragile as glass yet carrying the weight of his regret. Michael's jaw tightened, his gaze flickering with a volatile mix of anger and sorrow, the conflicting tides of forgiveness and bitterness crashing silently in his mind. The room felt smaller, suffocating under the gravity of emotions swirling between them. Michael's voice finally emerged, quieter than before but laced with the vulnerability he had kept buried for so long. I needed you. And you weren't there. I grew up learning how to survive without you. I don't know if I can just forget that. The confession shattered the brittle calm, exposing the raw nerve of pain that had shaped his life, a wound that time alone could not heal. John reached out, hesitant but desperate to bridge the chasm. His hand trembled as it hovered over Michael's arm, a silent plea for connection that spoke louder than words. I don't expect forgiveness. I only want a chance to be here now to try to make things right, no matter how broken we are. The fragility of that offer was palpable, a lifeline tossed into turbulent waters. In that charged moment, Mark's steady presence became a balm, grounding the emotional tempest. His voice, calm and unwavering, reminded them both of battles fought and survived, of resilience forged in fire. We all carry scars, Mark said softly, but scars don't have to define us. Sometimes they remind us what we're fighting for. The silence that followed was different, no longer heavy with pain, but pregnant with possibility. The air shifted, carrying a fragile hope that maybe, in the tangled web of broken trust and fragile love, there could be a thread strong enough to weave a new beginning. John and Michael, bound by blood and haunted by absence, faced the raw truth of their fractured bond. Yet within that truth lay the first tentative steps toward healing, painful, uncertain, but real. As the night deepened, words came slowly, awkwardly, but with a sincerity that neither had dared to summon before. Each confession, each question, each small admission was a brick laid in the slow rebuilding of a relationship once thought lost. It was a process as delicate as it was desperate, a psychological dance between hope and fear, love and regret, past and future. John knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with shadows, but as he looked into Michael's eyes, glistening with unshed tears, he allowed himself to believe in the fragile promise of reconciliation. In that quiet room, where silence once reigned supreme, the fragile echo of connection began to take shape, a testament to the enduring power of love, even when it is battered and broken. The hours slipped away, marked only by the slow unraveling of guarded hearts and the tentative weaving of threads long torn. John's confession, raw and unvarnished, hung between them like a fragile bridge, each word a trembling step toward an uncertain future. Recognition dawned quietly in Michael's eyes, not as sudden forgiveness, but as the reluctant acknowledgement of a shared pain that had shaped them both in ways neither could deny. The weight of absence, the void left by years of silence, began to transform into something else, a recognition not just of loss, but of what remained beneath it all, an unbroken bond, fragile yet real. John saw it in the way Michael's defenses faltered, the way his gaze softened for the briefest moment before retreating into shadows. It was the beginning of a reckoning, not just with the past, but with themselves, accepting their wounds, their failures, their humanity. I know I cannot erase the years I was gone, John whispered, voice breaking under the gravity of regret, but I want to make amends, not with grand gestures, but with every day I have left. The vulnerability in his words was a raw offering, an open hand extended across a chasm carved by neglect and regret. Michael's breath hitched, the walls he'd built trembling with the force of emotions long buried. He wasn't ready to say the words forgiveness demanded, nor to dismiss the ache that had carved deep into his soul. Yet beneath the anger, beneath the sorrow, a fragile hope flickered, a hope that this fractured reunion might somehow become a beginning rather than an end. It won't be easy, he said, voice rough and uncertain, but maybe we can try. Not for the past, but for whatever's left. The act of recognition, of naming their shared pain, shifted the room's atmosphere. It was no longer a battlefield littered with accusations and silence, but a fragile space where healing could begin, slowly, unevenly, painfully. John's eyes filled with tears, the first he'd allowed himself in years, as he reached out and took Michael's hand, the contact both tentative and electrifying. The touch spoke of regret, of longing, but also of a promise, a commitment to repair what had been broken, piece by fragile piece. Mark, standing quietly nearby, observed the scene with a silent understanding. He knew that recognition was only the first step. The hard part was yet to come, the laborious, relentless work of rebuilding trust and love in the ruins of absence. His own history with John had taught him that redemption was a journey of small, consistent acts, not a sudden, miraculous transformation. Sometimes, Mark said softly, the only way forward is to face the past without flinching, to own the pain and let it teach you how to love differently. His words, simple yet profound, settled over them like a balm, a reminder that acknowledgement and reparation were not acts of weakness but of courage. The night stretched on, filled with quiet conversations and shared silences, the air heavy with the unspoken truth that healing would be neither swift nor certain. Yet within the fragile exchanges, beneath the raw edges of emotion, a seed was planted, a seed that, nurtured with honesty and patience, might grow into something resilient enough to withstand the storms to come. John's heart, once hardened by regret and distance, softened with each moment of recognition and each tentative step toward restitution. Michael, too, allowed himself to glimpse a future where the shadows of abandonment might one day be replaced by light. In that fragile space, amidst the lingering pain and uncertainty, they began to write a new story, one not defined by what was lost but by the courage to seek restoration, one imperfect day at a time. This story, at its core, is a mirror held up to the fractured human heart, an intimate exploration of how absence carves hollows within us, shaping our identity as much by what is missing as by what remains. It reveals the fragile architecture of love and loss, how the bonds meant to sustain us can become both our greatest source of strength and deepest well of pain. The narrative lays bare the raw, often contradictory emotions that ripple beneath the surface of estranged relationships. Guilt intertwined with resentment, yearning shadowed by fear, hope tinged with doubt. It is a psychological journey into the complexity of forgiveness, not as a simple act, but as a slow, arduous process that demands vulnerability, courage, and above all, an unflinching confrontation with one's own scars. In this story, absence is not merely physical but psychological. It is the silence between father and son that screams louder than words, the invisible wound that time cannot fully heal. The characters embody the universal human struggle to reconcile the past with the present, to find meaning in pain, and to bridge the chasm wrought by years of distance. The narrative invites us to dwell in the uncomfortable spaces where love and regret coexist, urging an honest reckoning with the messiness of human connections rather than offering tidy resolutions. It suggests that healing is less about forgetting or erasing the past and more about embracing its shadows, acknowledging the fractures without letting them define us completely. At a deeper level, the story challenges the notion of perfection in relationships and parenthood, exposing the flawed, often messy reality behind social expectations and personal ideals. It confronts the myth of unconditional love as something unproblematic, instead portraying it as a terrain marked by failure, misunderstanding, and the relentless work of rebuilding trust. Through the emotional turbulence of John and Michael's encounter, the narrative articulates a profound truth. Love, even when battered by time and neglect, holds the potential to endure, not by erasing hurt but by carrying it together with honesty and grace. Ultimately, this tale resonates because it speaks to the human condition, the fragile balance between connection and isolation, the yearning to be seen and understood despite our imperfections, and the courage it takes to reach out when all seems broken. It invites readers to reflect on their own fractured bonds, their own silences and longings, offering a quiet hope that even the deepest wounds can foster growth and renewal. Through its psychological depth and emotional richness, the story becomes more than just a narrative. It becomes a meditation on forgiveness, resilience, and the enduring, complicated power of love to heal and transform.